Hey guys, what's up? It's Finch here. Today we're going to be discussing Zamazenta-Crowned in the OU tier. Is it broken and banworthy, or should it remain in the OU tier? We're going to be answering those questions and much more during today's special suspect coverage edition of Metagame Friday, because it's not Monday, and I decided to do this video on a Friday, so lo and behold, here we are. Zamazenta-Crowned is a very controversial Pokemon right now, arguably polarizing in the metagame and in the suspect discussions, generating quite a bit of posting and disputes and so much more, and we're going to get through all of that, its place in the metagame, my personal beliefs on it, and everything else under the sun pertaining to Zamazenta-Crowned in this video. So if you're interested in the suspect but you don't know where to begin, this is the video for you. I'm going to be covering every single topic. Let's break it down before we get into it. First off, I'm going to discuss the different variants of Zamazenta-Crowned. While I do list 6 of them, only 2 of them are standard, and those are going to be specifically focused on as well. I'm going to start off after that by going through the counters to it. There are Pokemon that no matter what you are on Zamazenta-Crowned, it's almost definitely going to struggle to defeat them. These Pokemon I consider counters. There are probably anywhere from 5 to 8 counters in the metagame, depending on how you look at it, and the scope which you're willing to accept as a counter. However, there are, in my opinion, well over a dozen additional potential checks to it, and I'm going to go over some of the most common checks that may fit on every single archetype of team, ranging from the dreaded stall team. Oh no, the dreaded stall team. And this is not a team, by the way, it's just a list of example checks, to more balanced and offensive teams. In addition, I'm going to be discussing some noteworthy interactions involving Zamazenta-Crowned at the end of the video, as well, just to tie together some loose ends. Finally, I'm also going to intertwine with all of this my personal stance on Zamazenta. See, do I believe it should be banned or not? Spoiler, not. And why? So, I advise that you take a second to pause this video right now, grab your popcorn or whatever it is you do to enjoy watching long YouTube videos, and get going. I also want to say that while there is a visual component of this video, I'm going to be going over sets on the screen. This is largely a vocal video. There's not going to be any battling or replays on the screen, so if you want to use this as more of a podcast and do your homework or go work out or whatever it is you guys do during your day, it's totally up to you, of course, and I encourage you to do that. Everyone should get out and have productive, wholesome, enjoyable days, and I'm rooting for each and every one of you guys watching this video. Anyway, with that said, it's already been a couple of moments, and we're going to go ahead and stop fooling around. Let's get into it. Zamazenta-Crowned in the SSC metagame. It's the big dog right now. Tested down from the Ubers tier, despite not having any prior history in the OU metagame, being the first Pokemon to do that in almost 10 years. In fact, roughly 9 years, when Pokemon Black was in the same exact position in Black and White 2 overused. Pokemon Black actually ended up dropping down into overused that generation, being a perfectly balanced Pokemon, and holding that title as a perfectly balanced OU Pokemon in both Generation 6 and 7. This generation, unfortunately, it gained access to Dragon Dance, Heavy Duty Boots, Icicle Sphere, and even things like Freeze Dry as well. That made it probably too problematic for OU to ever have it again. But with this said, we are more than happy to test down another Pokemon Zamazenta-Crowned. And maybe, just maybe, it'll end up too much like Pokemon Black did this generation, or maybe it'll end up not quite broken like Pokemon Black in Generations 5, 6, and 7. So let's find out. Well, first off, what is Zamazenta-Crowned? I'm sure most of you guys watching this video already know it, and if you guys want to go ahead and skip 2 or 3 minutes down the line, I won't be offended, but for those of you that don't know, it's an offensive Pokemon in the OU metagame right now, while it unfortunately is having a bit of an identity crisis, as it wants to use offensive moves. It has an offensive move pool. It doesn't learn things like Body Press. It doesn't have a recovery move like Recover. It doesn't have access to things like Bulk Up or like Taunt. Not to mention, it doesn't have access to any status moves either. Moreover, it's geared to be an offensive Pokemon. Howl, unfortunately, is its lone attack boosting option. It doesn't have access to Swords Dance, Dragon Dance, Home Claws, etc., but Howl arguably is sufficient, as it is paired with some strong stab moves, Close Combat, and potentially Behemoth Bash. Both of these moves clocking in at 100 or higher base power, which for stab moves is pretty impressive. However, when it comes to coverage, there is potentially some room left to be desired, if you will. There's no Earthquake, no Stone Edge or Rock Slide. You get some more fringe coverage moves that potentially have drawbacks like low base power, i.e. Ice Fang, or Recoil, i.e. Wild Charge, or being generally just subpar coverage options like Crunch and Psychic Fangs when not used on a very particular Pokemon, but as a collective, it's definitely a very viable offensive presence in the metagame. Coming off 130 base attack, you might be thinking, wow, this Pokemon is quite strong, particularly strong, having an above average attack stat for the metagame, but unfortunately, the Zamazenta-Crowned is stuck with the item Rusted Shield, which is very beneficial to her. With its ability Dauntless Shield, it makes it in the Crown form and gives it +1 defense, which, on top of already impressive 145 base defense, is absolutely monstrous. But that also makes it much weaker, losing the ability to run items like Life Orb, Choice Band, Berries, or potential other attack boosting items like, say, Muscle Band. Moreover, the lack of an item makes it so that it's about as strong as, say, a base 87 attack Life Orb user, or somewhere in the base like low 70s, like 73 attack Choice Band user. Obviously, those Pokemon have drawbacks. Life Orb users, they're taking 10% each turn. Choice Band users, they are locked into a single move. Having that luxury, not having to be locked into a move or taking recoil each move, is a greatly beneficial practice for Zamazenta-Crowned. However, it lacks recovery. While other Pokemon, say Life Orb users like Hydreigon, can run Roost, that's definitely not the case for Zamazenta-Crowned. It's only recovering via Wish support or having to lock into sleep with Rest on its own, and the latter takes up a very valuable move slot, whereas the former takes up very valuable team support. Moreover, the opportunity cost that comes along running Zamazenta-Crowned consistently is noteworthy in that it's probably larger than some other Pokemon that could have been dropped down for Ubers. For example, we dropped down Cinderace and Magearna, and Kieran Black, and Zygarde, all previously in this metagame, Melmetal as well. And all those Pokemon were pretty much do-it-yourself Pokemon, short of maybe, I guess you could say short of maybe Melmetal, because Melmetal is still OU, and it definitely does rely on support that's truly thrive in its metagame, but even then, Melmetal standalone is a strong Pokemon. Zamazenta-Crowned is a strong Pokemon, and it absolutely can be self-sufficient in OU metagame, but is it over the top without much support? I don't think there's any argument to that. I don't think anyone's arguing that without Wish or Future Sight, Zamazenta-Crowned would be banned in OU ever. In fact, I think that's the furthest from the truth. Zamazenta-Crowned is a standalone Pokemon. It's strong. It is good, but is it broken? No, not at all in my eyes. This kind of segues us into what the bigger picture is. You oftentimes see it with things like Slowbro or Slowking, which carry Future Sight plus Teleport, or Clefable or Blissey, which carry Wish, and even the former Clefable can carry Wish plus Teleport. These Pokemon can bolster the effectiveness of Zamazenta-Crowned. Is that beneficial benefit to its presence enough to push it over the top, especially when you consider the fact that those are fairly common Pokemon, but also you take into account that it's very specific team support nonetheless. In my opinion, still, I don't think it's enough. Future Sight is what is going to be the best partner for it, though, in my eyes. Obviously, not every team is out the ground is going to fit Future Sight, but some do, and it definitely is going to reap rewards. We're going to get into some Pokemon that are going to be able to combat that combination regardless, and some Pokemon that perhaps are going to fall short against that combination, and also why perhaps Zamazenta-Crowned isn't the subject of that discussion, but rather Future Sight is, as we get on in this video. But first, I want to discuss the potential variants of Zamazenta-Crowned now that I've introduced the different sets it can use, different moves it can use, and so on and so forth. So Howl, again, is the big dog when it comes to Zamazenta-Crowned, boosting its attack stat by 1, going from 359 if invested max attack, all the way up to well above 500. In addition, if you were to run an Adamant Nature, then that would go from 394 all the way to close to 600, I believe, which in my eyes is pretty impressive. You're up in the high 500s, and that's a very high special attack stat. Of course, there are different variants of Zamazenta-Crowned. It is a Pokemon that, while limited in move pool, especially in terms of utility, recovery, and defensive moves, it does have an okay assortment of offensive moves. Perhaps all of them having their own limiting factor, i.e. Wild Charge's Recoil, or Ice Fang's low base power again, but still, it's a decent assortment. It has the Bolt Beam coverage, which is perhaps the best dual coverage moves that you could have, coupled with close combat, making it a very fearsome Pokemon in this particular set. Now, personally, with Ice Fang, I don't feel a need to outmuscle things, as you're never going to be breaking things like Clefable with the Behemoth Bash, or other fairy types not named Tapu Fini. For example, you can't break Tapu Koko very easily with this either. +1 close combat is going to 2 KO, but they can roost it off, and then suddenly Thunderbolt's going to do 1,000,000. So, you're kind of accepting that L against Clefable, and for the most part, Tapu Koko here. But in return for that, Ice Fang lets you hit a couple of valuable Pokemon. Most notably, the most used Pokemon in the metagame, Landorus T, and one of the other top 5 or 7 used Pokemon, Garchomp. However, beyond these two, it also gives you the ability to hit Zapdos and some other flying types. Zapdos in particular is important as, unless it's running the max defense set, which admittedly is very common on the ladder, it's always going to be 2-KO'd by Ice Fang from the Adamant Nature, and from the Jolly Nature, it's still a decent roll. You do indeed have to risk status 2 or 3 times from static, but also the best Zapdos can really do is Volt Switch for 20 or so %, or Heat Wave for 35%, which is not enough to really give it a ton of leverage. So moreover, if you're running Ice Fang, then Zamazenta-Crowned goes from being countered by Zapdos to kind of having a neutralist interaction with it, in that it can win the 1v1 if it gets a Howl off on the switch, but it also risks status, it risks losing momentum. For example, a lot of times we see it takes a Spike chip or a Rock Helmet chip, and then Zapdos comes in and it gets a Volt Switch off into something like a Specs Dragapult, and that's enough to take care of the Zamazenta-Crowned always, but you are taking a +1 attack with your Zapdos, but you are risking static with Zamazenta-Crowned. You see how it kind of goes both ways? I hope you do. Ice Fang, of course, being the kind of potentially changeable coverage move in this year. Wild Charge is very important on Zamazenta-Crowned. It hits Pokemon like Slowbro and Toxic, which otherwise would wall the dual stab combinations or the combination of Close Combat and Ice Fang. There are other options, for example, Crunch, which we'll get to momentarily, can hit Slowbro, or Psychic Fangs, for example, which we'll get to momentarily, can hit Toxic, but we'll get to those again. For now, I want to discuss the second standard set, which this one runs in Adamant Nature. In my eyes, if you're going to run Behemoth Bash, then you're going to want to run Adamant Nature, so you have moves with a bit more oomph behind them to hit Landorus T and Guard Chops, which are very, very common, especially right now. Having that extra firepower behind it, while you do lose out on speed ties with other plus speed Zamazenta-Crowned, and in addition to that, you lose out on outpacing things like Tornadus T and base 110 or 120 speed Pokemon, rest in peace Cinderace, does still leave you at a good speed tier. You're quicker than Blacephalon, you're quicker than Latios, you're quicker than Kartana, you are quicker than Garchomp, and so on and so forth, which is still very fast in my opinion. Moreover, Wild Charge, of course, doing the same thing we did before. Behemoth Bash lets you hit those fire types, lets you hit Clefable in particular, but also it does great against Pokemon like Tapu Koko. And it makes it so that you maybe have a slight chance, emphasis on slight chance, against Pokemon like Buzzwole, although if they got the good EV spread, probably not. We'll get to that later. But also there's mid-ground options there. And with that Adamant Nature, Behemoth Bash is at least doing 25-30% to fully defensive Landorus T, if I recall, maybe 30-35%, depending on the rolls, EV spread, and whatnot. But yeah, you still have to be careful. You're still a less than ideal situation. Same what goes for Tank Garchomp. Well, you don't have Intimidate, so Close Combat is doing about 40-45%. If Jolly, and 45-48% if Adamant, it's still better than, say, having a Jolly Nature. The point is that Ice Fang's the best against those Pokemon, but if you don't have Ice Fang, at least go with the Adamant Nature in my eyes on most teams, just so you have the extra damage up. Because Jolly Behemoth Bash is doing so little. It's not even killing things like physically defensive Clefable ever, even if it's like the speedy Life Orb Calm Mindset, which I don't think I've seen much anymore, so at least that's a relief. But yeah. Now these are kind of what I call Zamazenta-Crowned A and B, A1, A, whatever you want to call them. I call Standard and Standard 2.0 in the titles of the sets, the nicknames if you will. But truth be told, these are what you're going to see a vast majority of the time. If you run into 50 of these Zamazenta-Crowns, I'd say 45 of them will have Howl, and I'd say 45 to 48 of them will have Close Combat Wild Charge combination with Howl. And then the last move, Ice Fang, Behemoth Bash, whatever it may be, it's probably like 30-20 in favor of Behemoth Bash, although I think Ice Fang is a little bit better. But yeah, no, I don't know why I didn't do it out of 100, I did it out of 50, but whatever. The point being that these are the most common sets. However, there are some other options that are viable, including these other options, which we'll get to in a minute, but mainly these are, and I've ran into all of these multiple times, that's why I decided to make sets of them. Because I've probably played 300 to 400 games down the Zamazenta-Crowned metagame, ranging from the bottom of the ladder to get Rex all the way up to 1900s. So I'd like to think I have good enough experience. Of course, you guys can give your own opinions down below. I'd love to hear from you. I think a rest set is viable. It probably pairs nicely with something like Future Sight for Toxapex or Block to lure and cripple Toxapex and the right Pokemon, if you will. It's definitely very support reliant. The combination of Close Combat and Behemoth Bash not only leaves you with only 18 attacking PP, meaning things like Chaos Toxapex you're never ever going to break, but also definitely not full-on coverage. Things like Slowbro, Slowking, things like Aegislash really aren't going to mind you. Landorus T you're not going to touch much, so it's not great, but against the right kind of bulky combinations, or with the right support, it can thrive, it can do well, it gives you recovery. Although it does also give the opponents lots of free turns. This spread in particular makes it so that you're always going to be outrunning opposing Adamant Zamazenta-Crowned. And with this this attack investment, I believe you're getting a specific kill. I'm just trying to remember what that kill was. Let me think here. I think it was so that Close Combat was always killing a specific Heatran. But don't quote me on that. Actually, this might be so +1 Behemoth Bash has a good chance to kill Dragapult as well. I think it's both of those things. And then there's one other calc I had in mind that not coming to the top of my head right now. I know the 184 HP also was helpful defensively speaking. in that it made it so that you're shrugging off things like Moonblast and Clefable. Like maybe it goes for like a 3 kill to a 4 kill from Life Orb variants, or crap, it was And on top of that, you're never being killed by things like your Powdon, Earthquake after 1 layer of spikes, I believe, which is just mammoth bulk, of course. And finally, you're also able to live other Pokemon's attacks as well, of course, because you are a Zamazenta-Crowned, and that's what Zamazenta-Crowned does. So yeah, I will say that with this set, it's a lot more passive, it's a lot more defensive, and I wouldn't use it on more offensive teams. But this is a set I would use on offensive teams. In fact, it's one I showcased the other day with Crunch. I think on the right team, say you pair it with like Hawlucha, you want to really hit Aegislash, but also have that coverage for Slowbro. It'll do it. With other fighting types, Crunch is definitely viable. I like Crunch plus Ice Fang. At this point, you kind of sacrifice something. You really don't want to be hard-walled by Landorus Team Garchomp, and honestly, Behemoth Bash, yeah, it's going to hit Clefable, but the idea of those teams is mainly like to lure Clefable with other Pokemon and overwhelm them with the combination of fighters. So like, if you face Clefable, just howl up 2 or 3 times instead of just once, and then kill it with close combat while it probably kind of trades with you or beats you, but it leaves you very low. That type of interaction would be fine, because then your Hawlucha or your Dragonite or whatever the partner may be absolutely is going to demolish the opponent with that Clef Dead. So it's a worthwhile trade, if you will. But yeah, Crunch is good for Aegislash, and it still hits Slowbro, so that's cool. I like Adamant with it because you're less powerful than Wild Charge, so Crunch's extra damage output will help against Slowbro, and make sure you get the surprise damage off on Aegislash before it's too late, so why not? And then Psychic Fang's a very similar position there. Ice Fang, again, I like best for hitting the ground, hitting Zapdos and whatnot. Psychic Fang is there for Pex predominantly, although it does hit Buzzwole too, which I suppose is of note. Plus 1 Psychic Fang should 2-kill most Buzzwole you see, especially with the adamant nature, so that's helpful there. If their Drain Punch is probably a 3-kill, but most of them run close combat Earthquake, so they're going to Earthquake into close combat you, but yeah, no. Anyway, that aside, Psychic Fangs is going to do nice damage to those, but this set leaves you hard-walled against Slowbro, and this set leaves you hard-walled against Toxapex, and then that's on top of the other Pokemon that already check and counter you, which we're going to get to in a moment, so that's already not a great start there. Finally, there are some other options on Zamazenta-Crowned. Substitute is an option. You can run Sub-Howl. I've seen it only once though, so I didn't include it. Sleep Talk, if you're running Grass, you go a fully defensive set. You wish it has like Body Press, because that would be great, but it doesn't, unfortunately. And finally, I actually saw a team using like lead screens Zamazenta-Crowned as like a lure screen setter. It's really durable. It actually set up screens for offense like 3 or 4 times, but it doesn't have a momentum-oriented move or boom. It doesn't have Taunt, I believe, so therefore that's very limiting there. But hey, I mean, there's some niche there, I suppose. Why not include that too? Just because I saw it. So yeah, that's what Zamazenta-Crowned can do in the metagame. Now, let's dig a little bit deeper. Before we were talking about how Zamazenta-Crowned had some negative interactions in the metagame, how there were some checks and counters to it in the metagame, and so on and so forth. But also worth noting that there are some things that it discourages in the metagame, some things it limits. So there are some positive interactions, some things that it absolutely devours to the point that it might even limit their viability, and then there are some Pokemon that it encourages. I think this is the case for any addition to the metagame. If we were to add a Pokemon that was a fire type to the metagame, naturally water types would be better. If we were to add a Pokemon that was a water type to the metagame, naturally fire types would get worse. Kind of see how that cause and effect reaction works on a simple basis. Now, obviously Zamazenta-Crowned is more than a fighting and or steel type Pokemon. It's a complex Pokemon. It has very high defenses. It has good attack and speed as well, but it's lacking in terms of versatility in the move pool, it's lacking in terms of recovery, and it's lacking in terms of utility. In addition, it's a fairly predictable Pokemon. So, those are all factors that couple on with the fact that it's a fighting steel type that we just alluded to. And all those factors play into what can check and counter it. So, moreover, I've compiled a list of 6 Pokemon, ranging from very common to somewhat common in the metagame, that can function as counters to it. And I'm going to go through them in order of their perceived viability, in my opinion, in the metagame. So, yeah, just there. Okay. Volcarona is already top 10 to 12 Pokemon in metagame in my eyes, and it is a counter to Zamazenta-Crowned with just a little bit of bulk. Now, this is a more defensive set. This is my personal favorite set. I love it, especially with screen support and or Misty Transport, because it absolutely devours so many unprepared teams. But with that said, even if you were to just run 80 HP EVs on your Volcarona, you would always be living 2 wild charges from Zamazenta-Crowned. Or if you're fearful of adamant Zamazenta-Crowned, then it's just like 120 defense EVs, or roughly, that you would live 2 adamant wild charges, not to mention they risk flame charge burns as well. And then you can still run a fully offensive set plus 1 Fire Blast. Always is going to take it out, of course. Plus 0 Fire Blast is chance taken out for recoil plus Stealth Rock as well. So yeah, recoil from its Wild Charge, of course, which is the only move we can do. Zamazenta-Crowned is particularly weak to Volcarona. It isn't going to be able to defeat it 1v1. And on the switch in, Volcarona, so long as it hits a Fire Blast, even offensive variants should do the trick. But defensive variants are just going to sit there, wall it, and make it completely useless. This is the definition of a hard counter in the SSC metagame and other Pokemon contexts as well. Of course, Volcarona is not the only wall of defense against Zamazenta-Crowned. In fact, there are some Pokemon that can do the trick without even resisting its stabs. For example, Skarmory takes neutral damage from close combat, as does Hippowdon, and Hippowdon also takes neutral damage from Behemoth Bash. But these Pokemon have such high defense stats coupled with other characteristics that make it so that they're going to function well against Zamazenta-Crowned regardless. When it comes to Skarmory, the Iron defense set, which is increasingly common, is always going to counter Zamazenta-Crowned unless it gets a critical hit on you early. Basically, if you go for Howl on the switch in, it looked like Wild Charge is a good chance to 2-KO, but then the Iron defense and you just roost spam it again. If it doesn't get a crit on the first 3 or 4 attacks, not only is Rocky Helmet going to basically kill it, but on top of that, you're just going to sit there and wall it with Skarmory. This is another counter. Of course, if you're in a faster Skarmory, which outruns Magnezone, your bulk is actually going to be cut reliably, so that if it attacks and switch in, it can 2-KO you. But that's only with Rocks Up and if it's Adamant. So even then, you're still pretty well off. But you got to be careful there, and it also might have a little more of a chance of leeway with crits. So yeah, definitely be careful there. I personally prefer the slower one in this metagame. Anyway, Magnezone usage feels like it's dropped a little bit since Zamazenta-Crowned has dropped. Next up, there's Hippowdon. Hippowdon is a bit less clear-cut, as technically speaking, Zamazenta-Crowned can Howl twice, Howl once in the switch in next time, and then it actually gets a little dicey, because plus 2 close combat is going to 2-KO, plus 2 Behemoth Bash is a good roll to 2-KO from Jolly, and always does from Adamant. Moreover, Earthquake is a 3-KO, but with Rocks plus Helmet, it is a good roll to 2-KO if there's no bulk on it. And that, coupled with the fact that Hippowdon is always forced to take helmet damage, all of its moves are contact moves, makes it so that it's a pretty damn positive interaction with Hippowdon. And also, if you're predicted to get greedy, you could just whirl it out. And even if that means you're taking a +1 close combat, you could still actually live another close combat after that. Even another +1 close combat after that if you're not taking rocks, or if you take rocks, it's a favorable roll for you. So physically defensive Hippowdon is something I consider either a very, very strong check or a counter to Zamazenta-Crowned, depending on how you look at it. I can understand either perspective. Adamant is probably more of a really good check for, whereas Jolly is pretty much down towards, in my opinion. Moving forward, Buzzwole is another Pokemon that not only does it counter Zamazenta, but it does it in style. You can run an Adamant nature on Buzzwole, which is actually pretty trendy. The offensive 3 attacks Buzzwole. People are noticing that, despite it losing defensive utility, if you run more offensive set, Buzzwole's a threat, and it still is able to check things like Swords Dance, Dragonite. Swords Dance, Garchomp, Swords Dance, Landorus T, Kartana, and Rillaboom. While it does fall to some physical attackers like Victini, the aforementioned Dragonite, I misspoke, sorry about that, and Fairy types, it still is pretty good. And this is another Pokemon that can't really break past Buzzwole. Buzzwole's natural physical bulk does wonders here. And with this spread in particular, not only are you able to live a +1 Behemoth Bash, 2 +1 Behemoth Bashes, but on top of that, you're able to kill it with Earthquake into close combat after Stealth Rock always, and almost always from full health. And keep in mind that Stealth Rock's only doing the 3%, so that's what I mean. The rolls, it goes from 100% chance to always do that to 85 to 90% chance to always do that. Basically, the idea is they Howl or Behemoth Bash, whatever it is in the switch in. Okay, sure. From there, you click Earthquake. Earthquake is going to do about 35 to 37% on average. Then, after that, close combat is going to kill them. They're going to think maybe they're Drain Punch, maybe they don't have close combat, and you're going to kill them from there. And that's pretty straightforward. Even if that doesn't happen that way, you're forcing them out, and you've got Roost to recover, so you're basically a counter to it. Next up is Aegislash. Aegislash has the Steel plus Ghost typing, which is god tier against Zamazenta-Crowned, especially for running Crunch, which again, very, very rare. I've only seen it 2 times out of 400 some odd games, so yeah, that coupled with the fact that Victini is in the metagame. These Pokemon are Pokemon that are UU by usage right now. Buzzwole is UU by usage, but he really should be UU by usage. If you look at the last, say, month and a half of tournament play, like SPL, you've seen multiple times. And honestly, with Teacher Side, it's really hard to switch into. I think Buzzwole's great, but neither here nor there. Both these actual UU Pokemon, Aegislash and Victini, are genuinely like okay in the metagame. Aegislash particularly seen a little uptick in usage lately after kind of being bummed out by the dark spam. It's like, okay, screw it, I'm still good offensively. And Victini, a bit more of a developer. I like it given how very heavy the metagame is, and the fact that it is really able to synergize nicely with Pokemon. It is able to say get a Will-O-Wisp lure or Glaciate lure on ground types that are so common, and then from there, so many other offensive Pokemon can thrive with it, but it's still limited in its scope. I'll be the first to admit that. So let's say that we only have 5 counters to it. Or maybe you want to count 1 or 2 more things like physically defensive packs, Slowbro, which I personally consider checks. Then you could say we've hit 8. I understand either perspective. But be it counters or strong checks, there is ample defensive counterplay and offensive counterplay, which we'll get to in a minute, towards Zamazenta-Crowned in the metagame. Now, given that, I'd say that right off the bat, you could say Zamazenta-Crowned isn't broken. Now, broken is different from banworthy. Before we proceed, this is important. Broken and banworthy are 2 different things in the context of suspecting and tiering and bans. Being broken means that you don't have enough counterplay in the metagame. We can clearly establish that Zamazenta-Crowned has enough counterplay in the metagame. In fact, pro-ban posters like John W., guys like Myzozwa, an old SPL player, others as well, have acknowledged that there are enough checks and counters to Zamazenta-Crowned in the metagame. Ox the Fox said, yeah, this Pokemon isn't broken, but I still want it banned. I don't agree with that, but I want to know that the fact that something has enough checks and counters is not alone enough. What effect does this Pokemon have in the metagame? That's why we're having a suspect ladder. That's why I'm encouraging him to play someone. What is the effect? And a lot of people are saying something that I don't personally agree with. And I think that they jumped on this bandwagon because of premature hype from the early ladder reactions to Zamazenta-Crowned. So basically what happened was people saw a new offensive toy in the metagame that was very bulky, and they decided that they were going to tunnel and use stall teams to make sure they check it, because there are good Pokemon on stall teams and balance teams that can check it. A lot of balance teams especially. When I laddered, I ran into so much Slowbro, Zapdos, balance type of teams. I ran into some Buzzwole, Tangrowth balance type of teams, And then I ran into some full-on stall teams, the Quagsire, Mew type of stuff, the Roost, Safeguard, Volcarona type of stuff. You know what I mean? Those type of teams. I even ran into some Mew. If the metagame is centralized around defensive teams, then despite having enough counterplay, it doesn't actually make it so that Zamazenta-Crowned is a balanced Pokemon. So, therefore, it's unhealthy for the metagame. So, for Zamazenta-Crowned to be unbanned, it not only has to qualify via having enough counterplay in my eyes, but also it has to be healthy. It has to be a healthy presence in the metagame. It doesn't infringe upon the balance. It doesn't infringe upon the viability of different archetypes. And in my opinion, while offense is slightly worse in a metagame with Zamazenta-Crowned, I think it is still very viable, and in fact, I think we're seeing totally new waves with trends and different structures and whole new ideas being formulated, and I think that's amazing. I think that's a huge step for the archetype, and I think it's had to do this before. For example, when we saw Spectre Agapult see a ton of usage, suddenly we started seeing more Weavile and more Bisharp on these teams. For example, when we saw things like Melmetal pop up more and more in the early metagame, we started seeing teams rely more on Pokemon like Volcarona on these teams, or more like dual ground teams, or more screens. Let's go back further. When we saw more Toxapex, guys like Storm Zone used Slowking Galar on their teams, or they used Rapid Spin Drill as their anti-lead, as their hazard set lead, because they could spin those away. Okay, we can go back even further. In DLC 1, when people started using Wish plus Protect Clefable to heal up their teammates, instead of using breakers, that's when people started using setup spam. On the Wish turn, on the Protect turn, or on the Teleport turn, those are free turns to set up. Suddenly, we started seeing more and more Swords Dance Ground. We started seeing more and more Swords Dance Robo instead of Choice Banded. We saw more and more Dragon Dance Dragapult, etc. Back then, very much the case. The point is, and I can go on and on and on, this is not the only things. For example, when we saw more Rocky Helmet and Leftovers Landorus T recently, suddenly we started seeing more Weavile and Rillaboom on hyper offensive teams. Suddenly we started seeing more Dragon Dance Dragonite. In response to Volcarona being in the metagame, we saw more Dragon Dance Dragonite and hyper offense as well. The fact of the matter is that we see so many trends and balance in both the offense, but hyper offense is arguably the most reactionary playstyle of them all. In that while it plays directly offensive, the Pokemon that you see, the different win conditions and offensive cores that you see, they're largely dependent on the Pokemon they're going to face, because you got to break through those defensive cores and you got to pick the right tools to do so. And in my eyes, Zamazenta-Crowned does have a bit of a juggling effect on hyper offense. It does change the way that those teams are made a little bit. For example, Pokemon like Weavile, Rillaboom, and Bisharp are slightly less viable, but in my eyes, Weavile and Rillaboom are very, very viable. In fact, I think Rillaboom might just be as good as before, and here's why. A lot of people don't realize that Rillaboom doesn't get countered by Zamazenta-Crowned. You Swords Dance on the Switch, and +2 Superpower kills it, you live any attack from it, and if for some reason it doesn't, if you're the Grassy Seed set, then it lives to +2 Superpower, but then it dies to the +1 Grassy Glide afterwards. So, unless you're facing like a max defense Zamazenta-Crowned, which can't even 2-kill you then, it doesn't really matter. So, Rillaboom, okay, I can see why you're saying it doesn't like it because Grassy Glide spam is deterred, and it has a soft check, but not impacted. Weavile, definitely a bit worse in the metagame. I'll be the first to admit that, but running Choice Band low kick, it does mean that you've got to drop one of Icicle Crash or Triple Axle, but personally, I never run Triple Axle on Choice Band anyway because odds of missing aren't great, and Icicle Crash can flinch, which is cool. But low kick always took KOs, so Zamazenta-Crowned is still more of a check than a counter to Weavile. Bisharp, I think, got completely devoured. I'll be the first to admit, Bisharp was a bit of a casualty of this, but we're seeing maybe 2 or 3 or 4 Pokemon see less viability in the metagame. And honestly, I think we're probably seeing 4 or 5 or 6 Pokemon in return for that, maybe seeing even more viability. And that's cool. Admittedly, those are rough numbers, and that's my opinion. I see other people saying, oh no, we're seeing less Rillaboom, less Weavile, less Clefable, less this, that, and other thing, less Blissey, and we're seeing, more of the Pokemon you don't want to see. They're seeing more Volcarona. They don't like Volcarona. I get it. I do get it. And we are seeing more Volcarona, that's true. But, this end of the day, usage isn't centralized right now. We're seeing different forms of counterplay on offense, on balance, and on stall, to where I think Zamazenta-Crowned's effect on the metagame isn't super centralizing or polarizing, but rather it's just diversifying and it's entertaining. And I'm curious to see where the rippling effects go, because for every trend, there's a counter trend. For example, we see Zamazenta-Crowned, so therefore we see Volcarona. Suddenly, Heatran go to running Flash Fire a lot more instead of running Flame Body, because they want to make sure they handle that. And suddenly we see a little more Toxic on Blissey. As an extension of that, maybe Combine Clefable with Thunder or Thunderbolt starts picking up more so than Flamethrower. As a response to that, maybe Excadrill comes back. You see, it goes full circle, all these crazy trends. And the fact of the matter is that if I replace Zamazenta-Crowned with another Pokemon that made its Volcarona, like Kartana or Rillaboom, that happened. Literally a couple months ago, that happened in the metagame. We saw Kartana pop up, Volcarona popped up more. Especially after the bans of Germ and Zygarde, because that made less Buzzwole room. Once Buzzwole was gone, suddenly we see more Kartana. More Kartana means more bulky Volcarona. More bulky Volcarona means more Heatran. More Heatran, it means different other things, like the Clefable interaction, for example, that we just discussed. You see how it goes? So, the fact of the matter is that we might see a day or two of the metagame centralizing. People are trying to figure out what to do. But by now, if you're playing in the 17, 18, 1900s in the ladder, or even in the 15, 1600s, we're seeing a lot of diversity. We're seeing just as much diversity as we did before. We're still seeing a ton of boneheaded hyper offense on crack with all these fun, crazy, try-hard strategies trying to manipulate defensive cores, and I love that. We're seeing the same amount of crazy, annoying stall teams that take forever to beat. And honestly, we're probably seeing more balance than before, if anything. And less fringe teams like Orvale. I've only seen 1 or 2 of those. Maybe a little less full stall and more semi-stall. I've seen more semi-stall with like Buzzwole or Zamazenta-Crowned on it than I've seen like full 6 wall stall. So at least if you want to play a 100-turn game, then the odds of that are a bit less right now. But yeah, all in all, I think that Zamazenta-Crowned is balanced, and I will not be voting to ban it in SSU metagame by major changes. And to justify that, I want to note that, in my opinion, Zamazenta-Crowned has enough counterplay both offensively and defensively, therefore making it a healthy presence in the metagame, making it so that various archetypes are more viable. And we're going to go into how those archetypes deal with Zamazenta-Crowned now. Let's go over to the offensive checks and counters to Zamazenta-Crowned in the metagame. Now, the big ones are perhaps 3 of the most 5 common Pokemon in the metagame: Landorus, T, Garchomp, and Dragapult. None of those Pokemon listed before as counters, but in my opinion, they're all good. Sorry, they're all decent to good situational checks with very high upside and strong practical connotation. Strong practical connotation. What the hell am I? Strong practical viability in the metagame, regardless. So first and foremost, Landorus T. It can even tank 2 Ice Fangs from Jolly Zamazenta-Crowned with the right rolls, by the way. But that aside, it's very bulky. Behemoth Bash is doing little to it. I'm seeing that more than Ice Fang Ladder right now. Coupled with the fact that if you go for a close combat on the switching, it's taking a ton of damage. Then Earthquake does a lot in return because you -1 defense. And not to mention, it's still not Ice Fang range after the close combat, even with rocks up. So all in all, Landorus T, and to a slightly lesser extent, due to the lack of Intimidate, Rocky Helmet Garchomp, are good ways to deter utilization of and sweeping with Zamazenta-Crowned. It is at worst a 1 to 2 time situational check, and at best a 3 to 4 time durable check in terms of Landorus T, and you could say that, but slightly watered down when it comes to Garchomp. Of course, there are some trade-offs. For example, Landorus T on Hyper Offense tends to run a Suicide set with Explosion. That may be less effective and less common right now. I'll be the first to admit that. I personally prefer this set regardless, though. Explosion in a metagame filled with Corviknight and Ghost types, such as Dragapult, is very risky and arguably not going to be the most productive, especially in the face of Iron Defense, Corviknight, and Skarmory, which are very, very common right now. That, coupled with the fact of Stealth Rock being up and just getting a boom off, especially if it doesn't result in a kill, is oftentimes not sufficient for these teams. Teams that really, really, really don't benefit from rocks too much. Why? Because switching is at a premium. Those games are shorter with hyper-offensive teams, and heavy-duty boots are so common that the generic Stealth Rock Suicide lead is no longer something that necessarily has the same reward that it once did. In fact, in my opinion, Landorus T that can not only knock off items and set up rocks, but also generate momentum multiple times instead of just once with the explosion kill and to get your Pokemon out. U-turn on Landorus T is better on Hyper Offense, and I've been rocking this set for a couple of weeks now, predating this test. I'm glad to finally see it having more and more niche on Hyper Offense as well as bulky offense, and even of course balance teams. So yeah, Landorus T, a good form of offensive counterplay. It fits on the offensive teams, and it's a great pivot, opening up so many different things for those teams to do. Same goes for Garchomp. Again, the lack of U-turn, a little bit of a deterrent, but it does gain the ability to phase with Dragon Tail and or Roar. And it has Flamethrower as well. Hit things like Scizor, Ferrothorn, Kartana, which is very cool. Finally, it's worth noting, if you run either of these Pokemon with Rillaboom, you can run Earth Power. And Earth Power is actually going to do decent damage to Zamazenta-Crowned as well. So yeah. Next up is Dragapult. Now, I run 8 HP EVs on Dragapult because that always lives a +1 Jolly Ice Fang from Zamazenta-Crowned, which is funny because it's like a +1 Ice Fang of 130 attack, but the lack of boosting item really does make it on the weaker side, which I find to be relatively funny. So yeah. With that said, though, Dragapult's still not a counter, but it does always 1v1 Zamazenta-Crowned. You're living even an Adamant Behemoth Bash and any Ice Fangs, of course, while Flamethrower is always trick yelling. In addition to this, if you get, say, 2 rounds of Rocky Helmet, or a round of Rocky Helmet plus Spikes, Flamethrower is decent enough to kill, and any more chip than that, Flamethrower is always going to kill. Shadow Ball is a 3 kill from full health, always doing anywhere from like 35 or 36 to like low 40s, I believe. And finally, the Ghost typing makes it so clicking close combat is very hard in the game. It eases a ton of prediction, making it so that Zamazenta-Crowned is very hesitant and can potentially just not sweep from any position. If it, clicks close combat and you hard Dragapult, of course, there's a ton of risk there. If you hard Dragapult and it goes for Behemoth Bash, predicting that, then you're screwed. You're going to take a lot of damage, and who knows if you'll be able to complete the job. But with that said, Dragapult, in my eyes, is a great way to check, soft check Zamazenta-Crowned in the practice of a game, because Zamazenta-Crowned lacks recovery. It's very easy to scale some damage on it. Any hazards, any Rocky Helmets, any weak attacks, resistance attacks, you switch in on, I don't know, a Foul Play from Mandibuzz, you take 8% or whatever, it's 4%. You switch in on a, say, Moonblast from Clef, you take 22%. You switch in on a U-turn. Suddenly you take U-turn damage from Landorus T, 4% there. Suddenly you're taking Stealth Rock, that's another 3% there. Okay, you switch in on a knockoff, it's another 2% there, It adds up, and I get it. It adds up slowly sometimes, slower than you want. But in those games, it also oftentimes means that there's enough defensive presence when it's idling slowly that they can't break through it early on anyway, making it so that Zamazenta-Crowned isn't particularly effective at breaking, and it isn't particularly effective at being a wall either, as it's not lasting very long due to the lack of recovery, that the slow grind is going to be sufficient. Next up, there's Volcarona. This is the offensive side I looked at before. You only need 80 HP EVs to live 2 wild charges. from full health from Jolly Zamazenta, and you can just run like take out the HPVs, throw them in defense like 128 or some odd defense like that, live to adamant. It might be a little more than that, but the point of that is that you can really run the same offensive Volcarona, and it's gonna check, always check. Zamazenta-Crowned, as long as you get Fire Blast. Quiver Dance, Fire Blast always kills, no big deal there, nothing out of the ordinary. And of course, I actually prefer the Roost set on Hyper Offense because with Misty Terrain, which I love, or with screen support, it never fucking dies. And it's always going to beat things like Pex. Salmon Clef is going to crap on. Blissey, if it's not toxic, goodbye. It's just so long in those matchups, it's really nice to use. So yeah, but even just the offensive free attack set, because we're looking more offensive things here, I strongly advise trying that out. Next up is Aegislash. Now, this is a set I've been using recently on screen teams with weakness policy. I think it's really cool. You tank things like Earthquake, they do laughably little amount of damage behind screens, and then all of a sudden you're at like +4, +6 attack, and it's like, oh crap, because the lack of fast dark types, especially with Weavile and Bishop seeing a bit less usage, is really good for this. But anyway, despite that, I still see Aegislash as a really good answer to Zamazenta-Crowned, no matter the set. It really works as any set. I used a crazy mixed attacking set the other day too, on the video you guys might have seen, the team building video. If not, check that video out. I spent over an hour building with Zamazenta-Crowned in the metagame. I uploaded it all, so yeah. But on top of that, I just gotta check my. Check out Blue Boy Lakey Inspired. Just resetting the video really there, so yeah, it doesn't load different music. But yeah, no, I am Lakey Inspired Blue Boy, one of my favorite background musics. So yeah, Lakey Inspired in general. Anyway, Victini, also a good potential countermeasure to it. It's able to live anything besides Crunch. This set lives 2+1 wild charges or 2+1 close combats from Jolly Zamazenta-Crowned. Always only need 32 HP EVs. Pump the rest in. If you crit's gonna do a million, we'll forget about it, you know. Basically counters it. Honestly, you could have listed Victini among the counters to begin with. And I did. Okay, there you go. Yeah, but the thing that the thing was that I kind of give you like, okay, proceed with caution, because again, Aegislash, Victini, they're technically Yu-Gi-Oh Pokemon, so while they're very good, they're not as good as maybe say the 4 Pokemon listed that are all top 10 to 12 Pokemon in metagame, or the 3 Pokemon listed top 5 in metagame. You know, for every 5 Landorus T, you're not going to see 1 Victini. For every 10 Landorus T, you might see 1 Victini. So make of it what you will. Anyway, my point is, end of the day, Zamazenta-Crowned naturally does better against offense due to its lack of durability, its lack of walls, but I don't think it invalidates playstyle. I don't think it makes it much worse. I think with adaptation, which we're already seeing in the upper ladder, by the way, a crazy amount of adaptation, people reacting to the metagame, reacting to trends that they really didn't even notice until a couple days ago. It's also amazing how skilled our player base is, how many amazing, talented players there are that are there, coming with novel ideas each and every day. I love that. That's one of my favorite parts of the game, watching the metagame unfold in front of our eyes. So yeah, with that said, I do firmly believe that Zamazenta-Crowned does not invalidate offense, doesn't make it less viable, and that's one of the main reasons why I would never vote to ban it right now. With that said, though, there are more than offensive Pokemon in the metagame. In fact, there are balanced teams in Pokemon that work well on balanced teams in the metagame. And these Pokemon are as follows: Toxapex, Zapdos, Slowbro, Hippowdon, Buzzwole, and Tangrowth. They might be like, wait, is there some walls? Screw you. Like, okay. But they also serve other purposes. For example, Zapdos is Volt Switch. It's a pivot. It's also a great offensive check. The things as well, you can run an offensive set. And even offensive Zapdos, so long as you have the HP investment, lives 2+1 wild charges. So if it's not the Ice Fang set, you could run offensive Zapdos, and that works too. Which, in my opinion, is a slightly better Zapdos set, but neither here nor there. Not only is Slowbro a good offensive presence because Scald can burn in future set, but also Teleport makes it a pivot too. Buzzwole, this is an offensive Buzzwole set. And you're starting to realize, like, these Pokemon, they all have offensive presences. Hippowdon, perhaps the one exception to that rule. Even Toxapex, okay, I get it. It's clearly a wall. It's clearly a bulky Pokemon, but it fits very well in balance teams because it displaces items and spreads status. So all these Pokemon aren't particularly passive, or their passivity is neutralized by the fact that they make it so that the Pokemon that they normally switch into them definitely has to think twice before doing so, like without any like hesitation. So yeah, let's go through one by one. Toxapex can live multiple wild charges and +1 wild charge and +0 wild charge, which involves Haze is never going to kill it. So yeah, a couple of Rocky Helmet, Scald Burn chances, physical defense investment, and recoil damage from wild charge. It's not a good day for Zamazenta-Crowned. Zapdos, again, Ice Fang can do the trick if it's adamant or if it gets good rolls with Jolly, but with that said, Volt Switch plus the possibility of static plus possibility of it's not Ice Fang, it overall makes it a favorable interaction for Zapdos, which Zapdos ranges from either slightly neutral if it's Ice Fang, especially if adamant, or 2 just outright countering it if it's not Ice Fang. So yeah, static is a godsend. Anyway, next up, Slowbro. Same boat as Toxpex, except not only is it Rock Helmet, but also it has the ability to potentially do more damage with Scald Future Sight and teleport out, but also it's a very good partner. Zamazenta-Crowned. Future Sight, super good. But let's talk about that. I promised I would talk about this. So, Future Sight plus Zamazenta-Crowned is actually very good in this metagame. But it doesn't necessarily beat every single check encounter. For example, you see Aegislash, you see Victini, Pokemon that don't mind that. You see even Pokemon like Quiver Dance, Volcarona, and Slowbro, which really aren't necessarily fearing Future Sight too much. Volcarona actually can be put into a kill by Adamant Wild Charge with the bulky set after Future Sight, so that's worth noting. But it's really, Future Sight, in my opinion, is only for 2 Pokemon. Maybe actually 3 Pokemon. It's going to help you against Toxpex, it's going to help you against Buzzwole, it's going to help you against Hippowdon with Zamazenta-Crowned. Those are 3 big ones, because those are 3 of the more common checks and counters to it. I'll be the first to admit it. Suddenly, it goes from having a full slate of checks and counters, like more so than a lot of Pokemon in metagame, to having maybe 4 or 5 instead of, a dozen. I get it. Fair. Cut it in half. But that means that you have to follow a certain cookie cutter structure with your team, because those are 2 very specific Pokemon. That means that you have to have specific support for Zamazenta-Crowned. That means that in some matchups where you don't face direct combinations, it's not going to be pretty. And on top of that, the opportunity cost of that, requiring support, that's what keeps a lot of Pokemon in here to begin with. For example, Rillaboom is really, really good when Magnezone removes things like Skarmory and Corviknight, but no one's really, very few people, let me rephrase, are clamoring for it to be banned, because it just isn't broken without massive support. And that alone is going to, balance it, needing support. Because suddenly you realize that there are ways to take advantage of support. There are more free turns in the equation. There are very limited team structures that can fit Zamazenta-Crowned plus Future Sight. Suddenly there are these whole new barriers. So the fact that the strategy is checkable, counterable by things like Slowbro, Aegislash, Victini, Skarmory potentially as well. You live a +1 close combat after Future Sight, and you could at least whirlwind it out or get a body press off. I get it, the on your defense strategy isn't as good, but keep in mind that to get free turns from Slowbro, plus you got to get Zamazenta-Crowned in potentially multiple times to really find enough breaking opportunities. It just isn't always easy. This coupled with the fact that if you look at OU Pokemon, there are other Pokemon that do the same thing with Future Sight. What counters Bisharp plus Future Sight, or Weavile plus? How about Garchomp plus Future Sight? What about Dragonite plus Future Sight? Even the list is there. There are Pokemon that do this, but it's limited. The fact of the matter is that Future Sight is going to enable all sorts of fighting types. Holucha does great with it if you could fit Terrain plus Future Sight in the right team, but it's not going to happen. Why? Because there's so much support you need. You need Terrain and Future Sight and Holucha. That's not going to happen. So let's look at something more realistic. Urshifu Rapid Strike. Okay, I got my Tangrowth to check it. I got my Toxus to check it, but they're both getting nuked by Future Sight. What then? Tapu Fini? Okay, but that's only checking you once with Future Sight up, and only twice regardless. It's literally just suddenly Dragonite and Slowbro that are checking it now with Future Sight being present. That list is less prominent, less widespread than Zamazenta-Crowned's list of checks and counters with Future Sight. So, first off, if Zamazenta-Crowned plus Future Sight is really broken, which in my eyes it's not because of the opportunity cost surrounding it, the amount that it weighs down on team building and limits you, because every single move, every single team slot, it does mandate a certain, every action mandates a reaction, if you will. And it's kind of the same deal here. But also, the counterplay is there, and if you're saying that breaks this, it also breaks other things as well. So, I can't say I agree. In fact, in my opinion, Teleport is kind of busted, and it's been busted for a while. But I don't think that makes Zamazenta-Crowned specific problem. And I think people using that as the argument are taking the lazy way out and just don't want to adapt and change in the metagame. Just full disclosure, that's how I feel. Anyway, so yeah, balance checks. I just went into Slowbro. It does obviously check the Zamazenta-Crowned line very well, but also it partners with it very well. And then Hippowdon, we alluded to before. This is the offensive Buzzwole set we touched on before. And finally, Tangrowth. Interesting case. I like Tangrowth with both Focus Blast or Earthquake here. In either one of, Knockoff or Sleep Powder or Leech Seed. I really like all those moves on it right now. And of course, you're in Giga Drain too. You should live a +1 Jolly close combat ×2. but if it starts howling up, that's like it's awkward. So you kind of have to bait the drops and get Rocky Helmet for status spread. Sleep or paralysis threatened with the powders and spores and whatnot. Powders and spores and whatnot. I sound like an old time like Gremlin's kitchen right now. I don't know what I'm saying, but it's always gonna force out Zamazenta-Crowned once. So you're already forcing Rocky Helmet plus potential hazards a couple times there. Then the fact of the matter is that if you focus blast or you run leech seed, you're never really gonna get broken through by Howl's Zamazenta-Crowned unless he gets like 3 or 4 free turns somehow. So don't allow that. And Tangrowth is a good check. Admittedly, it's kind of shaky to what it can do back besides Rocky Helmet, potential status or leech. So I really like Focus Blast anyway in balance and Earthquake on stall. Focus Blast on balance because it helps you with Kartana. You're never going to lose to it if you hit. And Earthquake on stall because it makes it so that Heatran potentially can't come in as nonchalantly. It also deters things like your generator looking. So yeah, that's cool there. But yeah, no. So Tangrowth I'd list as a check on both stall and balance. Anyway, now there are also stall checks and counters to Zamazenta-Crowned as we hit the 50-minute mark. Gee whiz. Okay. So on stall teams again, Pex. Now we got like really bulky Volcarona. Quagsire just completely counters it. Mew. Decently common on stall teams, really only seen there in my eyes. I guess you could use it as a lead on hyper offense, but yeah, it's a fringe Pokemon, and hence the fringe mention of it. Finally, same deal with Tangrowth as we alluded to before, and Buzzwole, even bulkier sets can just hard counter it. So yeah. Sorry, I just didn't expect this video to go as long as this, it is. I thought this was gonna be like a half-hour video, so I'm sorry that, this happened, I guess. I don't know. If you're still watching, pat yourself on the back and say, have a good day, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say. But anyway, these are stall checks and counters. I'm going to try and wrap this up now. Yeah, so let's talk about some noteworthy interaction with Zamazenta-Crowned. Sorry, I had like a minute lapse there. So, much like Skarmory, but to a slightly less effective extent, Iron Defense Corviknight also does very well against Zamazenta-Crowned. It has a bit less natural physical bulk, coupled with the fact that there's a wider array of sets Corviknight can run, making it less likely to run this set, whereas Skarmory is kind of only that set right now. So be careful, but that's a very effective set against Zamazenta-Crowned. As for Coco, it's interesting, because if it lacks Behemoth Bash, it actually is always going to be losing to Coco. Coco can like outright check it and even counter it. Potentially, not really, because +1 Psychic Fangs or Ice Fang can do the trick to killing it, but realistically speaking, it's a lot less convenient for Zamazenta-Crowned to not Behemoth Bash. It's going to take a ton of damage. Thunderbolt's always a 3 KO on terrain. Specs Thunderbolt's always a 2 KO. You're always living 1 Behemoth Bash at +0 anyway, but +1 is going to take you out almost always, unless you run a lot of HP. So yeah, that's a noteworthy interaction just because it's common. Weavile, again, I don't think its viability is completely diminished. Low kick, always 2 KOs Zamazenta-Crowned. He's got to be more hesitant, more prediction reliant, so it's definitely an inconvenience, more so than it's going to outright wipe out of Weavile. I've seen quite a few Weavile. Clefable is important because Physical Defensive Clefable can actually do really well against Zamazenta-Crowned if it lacks Behemoth Bash. But if it is Behemoth Bash, then Clefable's setup fodder and it's going to get nuked. So yeah, finally, Hawlucha, competitor to Zamazenta-Crowned hyper offense, if you will now. A little less Hawlucha we see, but also if you pair it with Rillaboom, then you're always going to do very well against Zamazenta-Crowned with Hawlucha. You live the +1 with your +1 defense, and then from there you can kill it with +2 close combat. However, if you pair it with Electric Rain, the +1 Wild Charge can freaking demolish you, so be careful. It's a very complex, kind of situationally based interaction there. And finally, Torkoal. Sun teams ravage Zamazenta-Crowned between the faster chlorophyll Pokemon that can range kill it and Venusaur Never Dying. And Torkoal's good matchup against it, coupled with the fact that they really are never giving it free turns unless they run Blissey, which, okay, that's the one exception to the rule, and that alone is just teleporting out half the time. They're going to do very well against it. Rain Team's a bit less effective against it, if only because Pelipper's dying to Wild Charge is less good than Torkoal walling Zamazenta-Crowned. But even they can overwhelm it. Barraskewda in range is a million, not to mention Pokemon like Seismitoad with Swift Swim or any special attack with Swift Swim can really do a lot of damage to it. And it really only comes in safely on Ferrothorn. So yeah, weather teams besides Sand don't really love it, and Sand, while perhaps a little more common than other weathers, definitely taking a little bit of a hit right now, even before this, but Extra can revenge kill it. If you're hit by it on Sand, you actually do very well against it. So yeah, not a lover of weather. All in all, I believe there's enough counterplay to Zamazenta-Crowned in the metagame. I don't want another hour-long video, and I've put together my case. I've listed offensive and defensive counterplay. I've listed how each archetype is able to respond to it effectively, and I've went through specific scenarios involving various Pokemon that form themselves as checks and counters in the metagame. The decision is ultimately yours if you qualify to vote, and I completely respect both sides of the coin here. No matter what happens, I'm going to wake up the next day and say, I had fun with this, because I've been having fun uploading. I've been having a lot of fun playing this Zamazenta-Crowned metagame. If it gets banned, I'll miss it a lot. Miss it dearly, but it's a fun metagame. It's a good time. I'm really enjoying myself. I hope you guys are too. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and have a great day. Okay, bye guys.